a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Battle of the Alamo. The Battle of the Alamo was a pivotal event in the Texas Revolution. Following a 13-day siege, Mexican troops under President General Antonio López de Santa Anna launched an assault on the Alamo Mission near San Antonio de Béxar, killing all of the Texian defenders. Santa Anna's cruelty during the battle inspired many Texians, both Texas settlers and adventurers, from the United States, to join the Texian Army. Buoyed by a desire for revenge, the Texians defeated the Mexican army at the Battle of San Jacinto, on April 21, 1836, ending the revolution. Several months previously, Texians had driven all Mexican troops out of Mexican Texas. About 100 Texians were then garrisoned at the Alamo. The Texian force grew slightly with the arrival of reinforcements led by eventual Alamo co-commanders James Bowie and William B. Travis. On February 23, approximately 1,500 Mexicans marched into San Antonio de Béxar as the first step in a campaign to retake Texas. For the next 10 days, the two armies engaged in several skirmishes with minimal casualties. Aware that his garrison could not withstand an attack by such a large force, Travis wrote multiple letters pleading for more men and supplies, but the Texians were reinforced by fewer than 100 men. In the early morning hours of March 6, the Mexican army advanced on the Alamo. After repelling 2 attacks, the Texians were unable to fend off a third attack. As Mexican soldiers scaled the walls, most of the Texian soldiers withdrew into interior buildings. Defenders unable to reach these points were slain by the Mexican cavalry as they attempted to escape. Between 5 and 7 Texians may have surrendered. If so, they were quickly executed. Most eyewitness accounts reported between 182 and 257 Texians died, while most historians of the Alamo agree that around 600 Mexicans were killed or wounded. Several non-combatants were sent to Gonzales to spread word of the Texian defeat. The news sparked both a strong rush to join the Texian army and a panic, known as the Runaway Scrape, in which the Texian army, most settlers, and the new Republic of Texas government fled eastward toward the United States ahead of the advancing Mexican army. Within Mexico, the battle has often been overshadowed by events from the Mexican-American War of 1846–48. In 19th-century Texas, the Alamo complex gradually became known as a battle site rather than a former mission. The Texas legislature purchased the land and buildings in the early part of the 20th century and designated the Alamo Chapel as an official Texas state shrine. The Alamo is now the most popular tourist site in Texas. The Alamo has been the subject of numerous non-fiction works beginning in 1843. Most Americans, however, are more familiar with the myths and legends spread by many of the movie and television adaptations, including the 1950s Disney miniseries Davy Crockett and John Wayne's 1960 film The Alamo. Background. Under President Antonio López de Santa Anna, the Mexican government began to shift away from a federalist model. The increasingly dictatorial policies, including the revocation of the Constitution of 1824 in early 1835, incited many Federalists to revolt. The border region of Mexican Texas was largely populated by immigrants from the United States. These people were accustomed to a federalist government and to extensive individual rights, and they were quite vocal in their displeasure at Mexico's shift towards centralism. Already suspicious after previous American attempts to purchase Mexican Texas, Mexican authorities blamed much of the Texian unrest on American immigrants, most of whom had made little effort to adapt to the Mexican culture. In October, Texians engaged Mexican troops in the first official battle of the Texas Revolution. Determined to quell the rebellion, Santa Anna began assembling a large force, the Army of Operations in Texas, to restore order. Most of his soldiers were raw recruits, and a large number had been forcibly conscripted. The Texians systematically defeated the Mexican troops already stationed in Texas. The last group of Mexican soldiers in the region, commanded by Santa Anna's brother-in-law, General Martín Perfecto Ducas, surrendered on December 9 following the siege of Béxar. By this point, the Texian army was dominated by very recent arrivals to the region, primarily adventurers from the United States. Many Texas settlers, unprepared for a long campaign, had returned home. Angered by what he perceived to be American interference in Mexican affairs, Santa Anna spearheaded a resolution classifying foreigners found fighting in Texas as pirates. The resolution effectively banned the taking of prisoners of war. In this period of time, captured pirates were executed immediately. Santa Anna reiterated this message in a strongly worded letter to United States President Andrew Jackson. This letter was not widely distributed, and it is unlikely that most of the American recruits serving in the Texian Army were aware that there would be no prisoners of war. While Mexican troops departed San Antonio de Béxar, Texian soldiers established a garrison at the Alamo Mission, a former Spanish religious outpost which had been converted to a makeshift fort by the recently expelled Mexican army. Described by Santa Anna as an irregular fortification hardly worthy of the name, the Alamo had been designed to withstand an attack by native tribes, not an artillery-equipped army. The complex sprawled across 3 acres, providing almost 1,320 feet of perimeter to defend. An interior plaza was bordered on the east by the chapel and to the south by a one-story building known as the Low Barracks. A wooden palisade stretched between these two buildings. The 2-story-long barracks extended north from the chapel. At the northern corner of the east wall stood a cattle pen and horse corral. The walls surrounding the complex were at least 2.75 feet thick, and ranged from 9 high. To compensate for the lack of firing ports, Texian engineer Green B. Jameson constructed catwalks to allow defenders to fire over the walls. This method, however, left the rifleman's upper body exposed. Mexican forces had left behind 19 cannons, which Jameson installed along the walls. A large 18-pounder had arrived in Texas with the New Orleans Grays. Jameson positioned this cannon in the southwest corner of the compound. He boasted to Texian Army Commander Sam Houston that the Texians could whip 10-to-1 with our artillery. The Texian garrison was woefully undermanned and under-provisioned, with fewer than 100 soldiers remaining. By January 6, 1836, Colonel James C. Neal, the acting Alamo commander, wrote to the provisional government, "If there has ever been $1 here, I have no knowledge of it." Neal requested additional troops and supplies, stressing that the garrison was likely to be unable to withstand a siege lasting longer than 4 days. The Texian government was in turmoil and unable to provide much assistance. 4 different men claimed to have been given command over the entire army. On January 14, Neal approached one of them, Sam Houston, for assistance in gathering supplies, clothing, and ammunition. Prelude to battle. Houston could not spare the number of men necessary to mount a successful defense. Instead, he sent Colonel James Bowie with 30 men to remove the artillery from the Alamo and destroy the complex. Bowie was unable to transport the artillery, since the Alamo garrison lacked the necessary draft animals. Neal soon persuaded Bowie that the location held strategic importance. In a letter to Governor Henry Smith, Bowie argued that the salvation of Texas depends in great measure on keeping Bear out of the hands of the enemy. It serves as the frontier picket guard, and if it were in the possession of Santa Anna, there is no stronghold from which to repel him in his march towards the Sabine. The letter to Smith ended, "Colonel Neal and myself have come to the solemn resolution that we will rather die in these ditches than give it up to the enemy." Bowie also wrote to the provisional government, asking for men, money, rifles, and cannon powder. Few reinforcements were authorized. Cavalry officer William B. Travis arrived in Bear with 30 men on February 3. 5 days later, a small group of volunteers arrived, including the famous frontiersman and former U.S. Congressman David Crockett of Tennessee. On February 11, Neal left the Alamo, determined to recruit additional reinforcements and gather supplies. He transferred command to Travis, the highest-ranking regular army officer in the garrison. Volunteers comprised much of the garrison, and they were unwilling to accept Travis as their leader. The men instead elected Bowie, who had a reputation as a fierce fighter, as their commander. Bowie celebrated by getting very intoxicated and creating havoc in Bear. To mitigate the resulting ill feelings, Bowie agreed to share command with Travis. As the Texians struggled to find men and supplies, Santa Anna continued to gather men at San Luis Potosí. By the end of 1835 his army numbered 6,019 soldiers. Rather than advance along the coast, where supplies and reinforcements could be easily delivered by sea, Santa Anna ordered his army inland to Bear, the political center of Texas and the site of K's defeat. The army began its march north in late December. Officers used the long journey to train the men. Many of the new recruits did not know how to use the sights of their guns, and many refused to fire from the shoulder because of the large recoil. Progress was slow. There were not enough mules to transport all of the supplies, and many of the teamsters, all civilians, quit when their pay was delayed. The large number of soldiers, women, and children who followed the army consumed much of the already scarce supplies. The soldiers were soon reduced to partial rations. On February 12 they crossed the Rio Grande. Temperatures in Texas reached record lows, and by February 13 an estimated 15 of snow had fallen. Hypothermia, dysentery, and Comanche raiding parties took a heavy toll on the Mexican soldiers. On February 21, Santa Anna and his vanguard reached the banks of the Medina River, 25 miles from Bear. Unaware of the Mexican army's proximity, the majority of the Alamo garrison joined Bear residents at a fiesta. After learning of the planned celebration, Santa Anna ordered General Joaquin Ramirez y Sesma to immediately seize the unprotected Alamo, but sudden rains halted that raid. Investment. In the early hours of February 23, residents began fleeing Bear, fearing the Mexican army's imminent arrival. Although unconvinced by the reports, Travis stationed a soldier in the San Fernando Church bell tower, the highest location in town, to watch for signs of an approaching force. Several hours later, Texian scouts reported seeing Mexican troops 1.5 miles outside the town. Few arrangements had been made for a potential siege. One group of Texians scrambled to herd cattle into the Alamo, while others scrounged for food in the recently abandoned houses. Several members of the garrison who had been living in town brought their families with them when they reported to the Alamo. Among these were Aaron Dickinson, who brought his wife Susanna and their infant daughter Angelina. Bowie, who was accompanied by his deceased wife's cousins, Gertrudis Navarro and Juana Navarro Altsbury, and Alsbury's young son, and Gregorio Espazar, whose family climbed through the window of the Alamo Chapel after the Mexican army arrived. Other members of the garrison failed to report for duty. Most of the men working outside Bear did not try to sneak past Mexican lines. By late afternoon Bear was occupied by about 1,500 Mexican soldiers. When the Mexican troops raised a blood-red flag signifying no quarter, Travis responded with a blast from the Alamo's largest cannon. Believing that Travis had acted hastily, Bowie sent Jameson to meet with Santa Anna. Travis was angered that Bowie had acted unilaterally and sent his own representative, Captain Albert Martin. Both emissaries met with Colonel Juan Almonte and Jose Bartra. According to Almonte, the Texians asked for an honorable surrender, but were informed that any surrender must be unconditional. On learning this, Bowie and Travis mutually agreed to fire the cannon again. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like